at the famed House of Khan. For over 7 years, she worked as a senior designer for Los Angeles-based fine jewelry company Tacori. Raden is an experienced jeweler, trained scientist, and well-read historian, and her expertise sits at the intersection of academic history, industry experience, and scientific perspective. She lives in the lovely Beverly Hills, California, and she's the author of New York Times bestseller Stoned, Jewelry Obsession and How Desire Shapes the World. Please, everyone, let's give a warm welcome for Aja.
Well, thank you. It's lovely to be here, and I appreciate so many people coming out to hear about jewelry. I wrote this book, and I was surprised at how many people were interested in what it had to say. I thought people who like jewelry would be the only ones who wanted to read a book about jewelry, but it turned out to be a surprising blind spot on my part, assuming that because the basic premise in this book is that whether you realize it or not, everyone is interested in jewelry. So you can't help it, actually. You evolved physically from before the time you were human, from before the time you were primates, to be interested in jewelry. When you see something beautiful, not just jewels, anything, actually, a beautiful face, a well-formed piece of sculpture, pretty color, there's a certain part of your brain that lights up, and you would imagine, if I were to say, what do you think it is? Pleasure centers, reward centers, something like that? It's not. It's your motor cortex. The first part of your brain to react to something attractive is the part of your brain that controls the impulse to reach out and grab it, which is what we all ultimately do, and sometimes get sent to HR for. And want, and take, and have beautiful things. The central premise, can everyone hear me? Is that the history of the world is the history of desire. People make complex historical events more complicated than they are. At their basis, all of them, if you trace them back far enough, started with somebody who wanted something. That's it. They just wanted something, usually irrationally wanted something. And this book is 9 stories about 9 people who wanted something and the remarkable outcomes, whether that was the sale of the island of Manhattan for glass beads, or the invention of the diamond engagement ring, or the invention of the modern military, which surprisingly started with a woman trying to outdo another woman and turned into the first wristwatch. So I divided it into 3 sections: want, take, and have. And the first section is about why we want what we want, and what exactly we'll do to get what we want. And it turns out that's pretty grisly. And the second section is about the process of getting what you want. And essentially, the first section asks, what's a stone worth? And it involves a story I'd like to tell you about the glass beads that paved the island we're standing on. What makes a stone a gem? What makes certain gems more valuable than other gems? Because they're all pretty. And there's a big red stone in that iconic British crown we've all seen. It's called the Black Prince's Ruby. And until fairly recently, no one knew it wasn't a ruby. It's a red spinel. The bottom line is there's not a huge amount of difference to the naked eye between one gem and another, and yet a spinel is something anyone could purchase, really, and a ruby is not. So why is that? What makes something more valuable than something else? And that's a big part of what I discuss in this book. And they also, simultaneously, invented what we think of as modern advertising. They invented consumer research. They invented product placement. They paid movie studios to include diamond rings, to include the word diamonds, to put scenes happening in front of jewelry stores and make sure there were diamonds in all of the cases instead of other things. Everything you associate with the cigarette model of advertising, sell a lifestyle, make people want the idea, was invented by an advertising company called N.W. Ayers in the 40s and 50s for De Beers, because they were blocked from doing business in the US because we still cared about antitrust laws. And as a result, they had this brilliant idea that they would just sell the idea of a diamond ring, because it didn't really ultimately matter where you bought your diamond. They all came from them anyway. And it worked so well, most people don't realize that... Can we see these? Yeah. Most people don't realize that the diamond engagement ring is about as old as the microwave oven. It's not really a tradition. It was invented as an advertising technique. It was invented as a product to sell those. And those, on an atomic level, are almost identical to those. And that's pencil lead. So you can see these are in loose sheets, almost like if you laid cyclone fencing on top of each other. And they slide back and forth, and that's how you can rub it off on a piece of paper and write with it. And when you put them under a little bit more heat and pressure, they panic, and they form vertical bonds as well, and then lock into place, and they turn into these. But if you've ever heard that phrase, "a diamond is forever," and you absolutely have, it's been declared the definitive advertising slogan of the last century. You should probably know that a diamond is not forever. Not only is this whole idea made up of a diamond engagement ring to sell things, those specifically, and not very long ago, but also a diamond only panics and stays in this shape when it's under that kind of pressure. Once you dig it out of the ground and it gets to relax a little bit at standard temperature and pressure, it very slowly starts to turn back into that. So anybody who's wearing a diamond, and I'm sure some of us are, you should know that diamond is turning into graphite right now. So it begs the question, why are these so valuable? And the answer is just because somebody made us want them. And ultimately, the only thing that matters is whether or not you want it. I worked in a pawn shop, and I learned very early on that a thing has no value in a vacuum. It is worth exactly what you can get a person to pay you for it. No more, no less. It wouldn't matter if I had the Mona Lisa in my pawn shop. Not that. Oysters have to grow them. They're not in the ground waiting for us. And those oysters have a lifespan, and they die. Actually, most of them are eaten by octopuses. And that doesn't happen with other gems. And natural pearls are almost never the same color as each other. And you can see that strand is cultured pearls because they all match and they're perfectly round. And unless you're a jewelry connoisseur or you're really, really into antiquities, you've probably never seen a not cultured pearl in the 20th century. If you go into Mikimoto, those $50,000 pearl necklaces, they're still cultured pearls, sort of like lab-grown diamonds, because a very clever man named Mano Kokichi, who was a noodle maker in Meiji-era Japan, right after the U.S. sailed in with gunship diplomacy and forced their doors open, was sort of obsessed with pearls. But he also wanted to be a scientist. And that would not have been allowed a few years earlier, but the caste system was wiped out. And so he was allowed to do that. And it took him 20 years, but he was the first person in human history, after thousands of years of trying, to develop and perfect and patent a method of inducing the growth of pearls inside of oysters. So in a very real sense, he also kick-started biotechnology. The entire biotech industry owes its existence to this man. And this is the Taisho Ren. It was called the boss's string, or the boss's strand. It was, at the time, the biggest, most perfect strand of pearls in the world. And there were legal battles discussing the perfect storm of the invention of the printing press, which was immediately followed by the invention of the tabloid media, and this scandal, and this diamond necklace, and clop, clop, thump, the end of the Bourbon monarchy. And he said to our friend Laura, "Can she write?" And Laura, who had been my roommate in college, when I said, "I'll trade you, I'll do your math if you'll do my reading," said, "I don't even know if she can read. Why?" and then they conspired for a few days to try to get me to write a book. And I thought it was funny, and I said, "Fine, but only if I can call it Stoned." And Laura said, "Yeah, sure, whatever." And I didn't think anything would come of it, and then they hounded me, and I can be dared into doing anything, really.
You're always welcome at any of our parties. I think we have maybe just enough time for one more. So how about on that side?